Welcome to SpunTales.com, where we spin tales from around the web. This episode, we continue the story, The Falling, by J.D. Phillips. An advanced copy of The Falling, which is now on Amazon, was provided to SpunTales with permission to read on air. Be sure to check her out on her socials at facebook.com/authorjd and twitter.com/JD_author. Hartt hadn't seen anyone since Nurse Terry made a third failed attempt to get his blood pressure, this time using a manual pump that she believed had sprung a leak somewhere along the connecting tube. Or at least that's what she thought the problem was, since the truth was something she wasn't quite ready or able to put into words. Afterward, there wasn't time for Terry or anyone else to think much deeper on the matter. A stream of flashing red and blue lights colored the window near his bed as ambulances carrying victims of the collision started to arrive one after another. Those with the most critical injuries came first, and the hospital buzzed to life. The night shift, already short-staffed, had no choice but to pull together every person they could spare from each unit to assist in the matter, leaving the hall outside Hartt's room remarkably quiet, even as the building staff roared to life. In the end, Rita got stuck helping as well, despite the fact she was supposed to be in for day shift the following morning. She left not long after Officer Patrick, just before Nurse Terry made that final attempt at reading his vitals, and now he was alone. It surprised him to discover he didn't like being alone as much as he thought he would. Not with the flashing lights and the sirens outside painting his windows and walls with misery. Not with the few remaining nurses in the hall beyond, wondering and fearing without admitting their fear, and hoping he wouldn't hit his call button. Not because they suddenly found themselves overloaded, so much as what they heard about him. Something wasn't right. Something wasn't natural. He didn't hold these thoughts against them, of course. They weren't intended to be heard, and oftentimes the nurses were only scarcely even aware of him. Gut instinct and the subconscious desire for self-preservation often rose and fell in subtle waves, all too easy to dismiss or overrule, especially when the fear of the unknown stood as the main culprit. Even so, it did make his night inside the room pass more slowly. He didn't dare turn on the TV again, for the fear of the static, and the flashing lights made gazing out the window painful. He was tempted to climb out of bed and walk around for a bit, but he'd been warned not to attempt such a thing on his own. Getting out of bed meant calling for a nurse, and the nurses didn't want to be called. So it was. He simply kept still in his bed, watching as the flashing lights came less and less frequently until at last they ceased to be in silence. Things outside of his room and throughout the building settled. A short-lived calm spread from hall to hall, until the dead were brought in, and someone broke the news that the driver initially responsible for the carnage was in fact one of their own. Dr. Lisa Marlena Dunrow had left the hospital early, under the guise of being ill, and she was ill, just not the sort of sick most of it assumed. She'd sought to drown her illness at a small bar none of her coworkers could imagine her even setting foot in, until the feelings awakened in her earlier in the morgue were comfortably numb. And then, she made the fatal decision of going back behind the wheel. That the woman was intoxicated was an obvious given, the stench of the alcohol about her body upon recovery, though the official report would wait for toxicology results to back up the observation. Why she had veered so smoothly into the wrong lane and remained there, increasing her speed for nearly 20 minutes, could not be easily explained. Gossip traveled almost as fast as the thoughts of those passing in and out of the building, creating a nearly whole, albeit nonsensical, picture of the good doctor's final moments. Several had witnessed her driving with eerie precision for one under the influence, occasionally passing or honking a horn to prompt others to move out of her way as she barreled on against traffic, until she came across a semi that had nowhere to go. Witnesses agreed that she didn't even attempt to hit the brakes before slamming head on into the semi. And that was that. The semi jackknifed. A dozen or so vehicles ended up caught in the aftermath, and at least 7 were now confirmed deceased as a result. The reactions to the news amongst the hospital staff shifted from bewilderment to anger to contemptuous glee. He found the mix of responses confusing, to say the least. What made one cackle with an air of satisfaction made another weep still more, felt as nauseous as he had after his last cup of hot chocolate. No one processed the hushed words or the flittering thoughts the same way. They didn't even share the same opinion of the doctor, each maintaining a slightly different idea of the woman based on personal experiences. Who Dr. Dunrow was and what made her that way varied from mind to mouth and thought to thought, as well as whom one was talking to at the moment, and yet all, on one way or another, held a bit of the truth. It hadn't occurred to him that a person's identity could be such an abstract matter to define. So much emphasis had been placed on the factual things he couldn't remember about himself, and yet it seemed facts accounted for only a little of the larger whole of Dr. Dunrow. He found the thought both sad and troublesome, though he didn't fully understand why. A sense of normalcy slowly returned throughout the building as everyone returned to their usual rounds and duties. A new nurse called Mira, with long black hair pulled back into a bun, came around sunrise to make another attempt at checking his vitals. She didn't say much, or even make an effort to fake any smiles, as she placed the cuff around his arm. She'd had a long night. She'd seen a lot of devastation, and she'd been warned about him. He got the sense she honestly couldn't care less if she got good numbers or not, when all was said and done. The digital display on the white box attached to the cuff flickered as numbers rolled by, running up and down so quickly, so randomly. They started to look more like abstract shapes, or a puzzle involving connect the dots, than any numbers she could recognize. "It doesn't like me," he murmured. Mira grunted under her breath and yanked the cuff off of his arm. She tried not to notice the fact that the dotted pixels continued scrolling about the screen long after she'd hit the power off button, and shook her head. "You're breathing. You seem to be doing fine," she said. "I'll just put something down that looks good." "Oh. Thank you," he replied, unsure if what she was actually doing was a good thing or not. "You're lucky," she said. "You got a second chance. If I were you, I'd get the hell out of here and make the most of it as fast as you can." "Where should I go?" A humph sound escaped her as she gathered the blood pressure device under her arm. "Anywhere is better than here, kid." Thank you for listening to SpunTales.com. SpunTales is a Heathen Digital podcast. If you have a podcast, or would like to start a podcast, and you'd like to put it on the Heathen Digital Network, send us an email at info@heathendigital.com. Visit SpunTales on Facebook and Twitter at facebook.com/SpunTales and twitter.com/SpunTales. Thanks for listening.